Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. It's Friday. The Taliban were supposed to announce their government, but they haven't. They're divided on portfolios. Welcome to the world of politics, we say. It's tougher than firing guns. And the challenges for them have only begun. Afghanistan is facing hunger, drought and economic collapse. That is the assessment of the United Nations. Millions face starvation in this country. The refugee crisis is exploding. America says it will help build facilities on the Tajik border. Britain says it will pay $41 million to neighbouring countries to keep refugees. By that, they mostly mean Pakistan. The British Foreign Minister is in Islamabad. Imagine betting on Pakistan after everything. We'll discuss all of this also on the show. American presidents keep talking about taxpayer dollars being spent on Afghanistan, more than $2 trillion. Where did all of this money go? Back to America. We'll tell you how. Has the Taliban's rise already triggered a new wave of jihad? New Zealand sees a terror attack carried out by an ISIS lone wolf, we are told. In Japan, Prime Minister Suga has stepped down, ostensibly over his inadequate COVID response. Is he making a virtue out of a necessity? And 55 million people suffer from dementia the world over. The number will rise 40% by 2030, says the World Health Organization. We'll discuss why. First up, Gravitas Global Headlines.
While the Taliban is expected to announce their new government in the coming week, the United Nations says it has resumed humanitarian flights to parts of Afghanistan, linking the Pakistani capital Islamabad with Mazar-e-Sharif in northern Afghanistan and Kandahar in the south. Syria says Israel carried out airstrikes on targets near Damascus, triggering Syrian air defenses. The second such attack in just over 2 weeks. No casualties have been reported yet. The UN World Food Programme warns that years of drought in Madagascar have pushed at least 30,000 people to level 5 of famine, the highest recognized level of food insecurity. Madagascar has suffered 4 years of drought due to climate change, forcing many to eat locusts to survive. China's Alibaba group says it will invest nearly $15.5 billion by 2025 in support of common prosperity. This comes as Beijing puts pressure on companies to share their wealth to ease inequality in the country. At least 46 people died due to floods after remnants of Hurricane Ida pummeled cities in the U.S. New York City witnessed historic rains, causing its lifeline, the subway, to be submerged in water. A study reveals that a majority of species threatened with extinction in the Amazon basin suffered habitat loss due to fires across the last 2 decades. Researchers used remote forest fire sensing data to gauge impact over time. The AIDS situation in the conflicted Tigray region in Ethiopia is worsening by the day, warns the United Nations. With essential stocks of relief aid, fuel and cash either running very low or depleted. ABBA is back. 4 decades after disbanding, Swedish superstars ABBA have announced a comeback with a new album and a London show.
We are back in London to announce that we have made a new album with ABBA. We have also made a concert. We're working on it, and that will take place just behind us here.
The pop group shot to fame in the 1970s and 80s with cult hits like Mamma Mia and Dancing Queen. 19-year-old Avani Lekhara has become the first Indian woman to win 2 medals at the same Paralympics. Lekhara bagged bronze in the 50-meter rifle 3 positions event today to add to the historic gold she had won earlier this week in the 10-meter air rifle. Praveen Kumar also won a silver in the men's high jump T64 class on day 10, while Harbinder Singh won a maiden recurve archery bronze to take India's best ever tally to 13 medals. Italy's first bow as European champions has ended in a disappointing 1-1 draw against Bulgaria in the FIFA World Cup qualifiers. Federico Chiesa's early opener was cancelled out by Atanas Iliev against the run of play, and Italy could not find a winner despite ending with 27 shots on goal. Elsewhere, heavyweights Spain suffered their first World Cup qualifying defeat in 28 years, as Sweden came from behind to win 2-1 in Stockholm.
Let's start with images of a victory parade. This is from an undisclosed location in Afghanistan, and I must warn you, the images are unsettling. These are Taliban suicide bombers marching in unison, carrying a white flag with the Shahada or the Islamic oath printed in black letters. In English it translates to this: "There is no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of God." This flag has now replaced Afghanistan's tricolour, and it marks the 30th time that Afghanistan's flag has been changed in the last century, 102 years to be precise, 30 flags for this country. This is the latest, the black and white one. These flag bearers were followed by a procession of suicide vests, rockets, barrel bombs, car explosives, armoured vehicles and other security installations of light weaponry. Taliban leaders watched from a makeshift stand. The procession lasted for at least 40 minutes, and all of it was broadcast on the national television of Afghanistan. Another such parade took place in Kandahar. This was a few days back. The Taliban's Victory Lap, brought to you by Joe Biden, sponsored by American taxpayers. What you see is a long line of green American Humvees being driven in single file by the Taliban in Kandahar. This is their headquarters, also their ideological birthplace, Kandahar. The Taliban parading on a highway, an American Black Hawk helicopter buzzing overhead. They're cocking a snook at the world, at America and its NATO allies. Reports say a former Afghan army pilot flew this chopper. The Taliban don't have skilled pilots, you see. The chopper carried a Taliban flag. It dropped confetti from the air, and men wrapped in headscarves were made to wave beneath. The procession soon reached the main city, where it was welcomed by supporters. These people had gathered at the Kandahar cricket stadium. They listened to speeches and victory songs, which heaped praise on the Taliban and poured scorn on the United States.
Our common enemy, who vowed to bring economic prosperity to our land, failed to do so. They claim to bring a civilized system. Go and take a look at the airport where all the planes are left in the middle.
I congratulate all the Muslims, specifically those from Kandahar, on this much anticipated victory. May Allah Almighty bless this victory. The victory that we have achieved today is for Allah's will and to spread Allah's deen on this land. May Islam spread to the entire world so that all the countries have an Islamic system.
You heard that. May Islam spread to the entire world. As this warning echoed in Kandahar, 500 kilometers away in Herat, Afghan women were out on the streets protesting for their rights and security. They carried out a march outside the governor's office, chanting work and peace. Same story in Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. Women out on the streets protesting for their rights, calling upon the world to ensure they don't lose their jobs. They say women form the majority of the population in Afghanistan and their fate must not be left to the Taliban's whims.
They must make sure that women participation in their government. We know that women from a majority of the population of Afghanistan, if they are not prepared in areas like education, health and politics, and do not have a role in these areas in our society, so the world will not recognize us. They will not hear our voice.
The Taliban are trying to make the right noises on women's rights, but virtually no one believes them yet. They also talk about inclusivity in government formation. It will be their first test, really, and we're not expecting the results in a hurry. The government was supposed to be unveiled today. That hasn't happened. The Taliban, you see, are split. Reports say the Rehbari Shura, which is the decision-making body of the Taliban, is divided over certain appointments. But hoardings and slogans have come up in Kabul now, announcing that the government will be formed soon. These images were posted on Twitter by Ahmadullah Muttaqi. He's the Taliban's media chief. Yes, they have one now. And yes, Twitter has not blocked his account. They only have issues with Donald Trump. They won't deplatform the Taliban because free speech. Anyway, the Taliban media chief has shared a video. It shows that the Kabul airport has resumed operations. This afternoon, the first plane from the UAE landed in Afghanistan. It came bearing food and medical supplies donated by the UAE. What about foreign embassies in Kabul? Most of them have drawn their shutters. Some have been relocated to Qatar, with the exception of Pakistan, China and Russia. And India, yes, the Indian embassy in Kabul remains operational. It is functioning with some local employees who, according to the Indian Foreign Ministry, are getting their salaries by the Government of India on time. Also in focus is the Panjshir Valley, the heart of the anti-Taliban resistance. What's happening there? The Taliban say they've surrounded the valley, also trying to negotiate a settlement with the resistance forces. Negotiating with guns and firepower, of course. The resistance forces say that they have inflicted heavy casualties on the Taliban. They also claim to have captured a Talib who was found with a Pakistani identity card. Look at this, the image on your screen. It was released on the social media handle of the Northern Alliance. Look carefully at what it reads. Excise and Taxation Department of the Government of Punjab, which is Pakistan's largest province. If the world needed more proof of who is fighting in the Taliban ranks, here it is.
Right now we are in the border of the Kapisa and Panjshir province. These are the resistance forces of the Panjshir Valley. They are resisting against the invaders that they are coming to Panjshir, that we call them the Taliban. So we have a lot of equipments with ourselves. We will defend from our valley, from our territory until we have one drop of blood in our body. So we will resist until we martyr in here.
This is Afghanistan 19 days after the fall of Kabul. The Taliban showing off their strength, calling for Islamic unity across the world. Afghan women protesting for their rights. Resistance forces putting up a fight to restore democracy and freedom on their land. The Afghans have been left with no choice really but to protest, to resist. The Afghans did not choose the Taliban, just like they did not choose the corrupt governments of Ashraf Ghani and Hamid Karzai. For the 39 million people of Afghanistan, life has been a cycle of interventions and unpleasant surprises with little scope for choice. When the Taliban overran the country, Afghans were forced to pick between the devil and the deep blue sea. Our next report explains.
On the morning of 9/11, when planes hit the Twin Towers, they destroyed the lives of some 39 million Afghans, thousands of miles away from New York. The US entered Afghanistan, enforced a flawed democracy, and began recreating the state of Afghanistan. America set in motion a cycle of interventions. In 2001, it made Hamid Karzai the interim administrator. In 2002, Karzai was confirmed as the transitional president. This after America pressured all his competitors into leaving the race. Karzai was re-elected in 2004 and again in 2009. In 2014, when Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah were competing, amid claims of massive fraud, then US Secretary of State John Kerry personally brokered a power-sharing deal. Did the Afghans have a say? They didn't. In 2014, Ghani secured a disputed re-election. America was happy. They said the flowers of democracy were blooming in harsh Afghan terror. Whom did they benefit? Just a handful of corrupt officials. Hamid Karzai's brother was sitting on a $23 million loan from the country's national bank. Did he repay it? You may want to find out. In 2014, Reuters reported about a $633 million loan scandal. In another case, Rehman Rahmani, the son of a former Afghan speaker, was given millions of dollars in contracts. He was supposed to supply fuel and security to US military bases. Where did the supplies ever reach? Again, you may want to find out. Many Afghan officials reportedly stole paychecks given by the Americans. They stole arms, even food. The supplies were meant for Afghan soldiers. They never reached them. America was paying for a 300,000 men strong Afghan army, but the number of men standing in uniform was much smaller. The balance was being pocketed. Officials squeezed the Afghan army and the civilians alike. An ordinary Afghan was forced to cough up huge sums every time he crossed a checkpoint or went to an office for paperwork. Even applying for a job required him to bribe an official first. The people of Afghanistan had no choice but to pay and put up with that version of democracy. The soldiers had no choice but to man their posts without pay. So when the Taliban went from one province to another, many men in uniform surrendered without a fight. Many people in their homes hoped that the Taliban would clear their country of corruption. The Afghans did not choose this Taliban regime. Just like they did not choose the US intervention and the corrupt governments that followed. When the Taliban came knocking on the door, the choice for the family in the house was between the devil and the deep sea. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
There's an old saying in journalism, follow the money. Whether it's a political scandal, a stock market swindle, or even a war, follow the money and you will find the culprit. So we decided to follow the money in Afghanistan. How much are we talking about? Around $2.26 trillion. That's how much America spent in Afghanistan. In other words, $300 million a day. American presidents keep waxing eloquent on taxpayer dollars being spent on Afghanistan. But where did all of this money go? The Afghans certainly don't have it. 90% of the people in Afghanistan live on less than $2 a day. The fact is, most of this money went back to the US. How? Through defense companies and contractors. You see, America basically outsourced the Afghan war. They were funding it, but most of the work was being done by private companies. American private companies. They did everything in Afghanistan. They supplied vehicles, they supplied aircraft, weapons, ammunition. They trained Afghan soldiers, and they did not do this for free. They were paid for all of this. Think of it as a revolving door. US government made the payments, but the money never left America. It was transferred to US companies. The numbers support this. Let's look at the top 5 military contractors: Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman. Between 2001 and 2021, these companies got $2.02 trillion in public funding, $2.02 trillion. Where did this money go? Into Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and many other futile wars. We say American soldiers lost the Afghan war, and they did, but American businessmen had a splendid victory. We have more numbers to support this. Let's go back to September 18th, 2001, just 7 days after 9/11. Assume you bought $10,000 worth of stock from America's top 5 military contractors, $10,000 in 2001. Do you know how much those stocks are worth today? Almost 100,000. 10 times more than 2001. Other stocks would have only given you $60,000, but defense companies were a different deal altogether. Imagine the profits. It tells you why the war dragged on for 20 years. A forever war also means forever profits. The Pentagon keeps boasting about how they built up the Afghan army. Well, here's the truth. The Pentagon flooded Afghanistan with American technology. Afghan soldiers carried American rifles. They drove American trucks. They flew American aircraft. All of these were bought from US contractors. So the money never left America's borders. It's a massive nexus between arms dealers, politicians, and the White House. Whistleblowers had flagged this nexus. Here's WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange talking about the Afghan war back in 2011.
Not to completely subjugate Afghanistan. The goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the United States, out of the tax bases of European countries, through Afghanistan and back into the hands of a transnational security elite. That is the goal, i.e. the goal is to have an endless war, not a successful war.
Hard to argue with that. Nation building was just an excuse to get rich. The United States had established a special agency to monitor Afghan reconstruction. This is what it's called, Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. They submitted a report in 2018. What did it say? Almost $15 billion had disappeared. $15 billion. How? Through fraud and wastage. Most of it ended up in US pockets. And this is not military expenditure. This is nation building. Roads, dams, government buildings. Not only did American companies make money, they royally messed up the situation. Let me give you an example. This is the uniform of the Afghan National Army. It's a forest camouflage, perfect for fighting in the tropics. But in Afghanistan, it makes no sense. The country has 2% forest cover, 2%. If anything, the soldiers stood out. That was another $28 million for US contractors and of no use to Afghans. This sums up the American engagement, basically. No oversight, no scrutiny, just billions of dollars flowing endlessly over 20 years. What did the Afghans gain from it? Nothing. They still live in poverty and hunger. So American taxpayers did not rebuild Afghanistan. They rebuilt their own economy. And this is America's strategy everywhere. Bomb countries back to the Stone Age and then pretend to build it back. In each of these countries, the American military lost, yes, but America, Inc. won decisively. Talking about winners, Pakistan. On Thursday, we told you how foreign ministers from European countries are making a beeline for Pakistan to discuss the situation in Afghanistan with Pakistan. After the foreign ministers of Germany and the Netherlands, the British Foreign Secretary has landed in Islamabad. Dominic Raab. He landed in Islamabad's, in Pakistan's capital, Islamabad, this afternoon. This was after a brief visit to Qatar, where the Taliban's political office is located. Upon arrival, he was taken straight to the office of his Pakistani counterpart, Shah Mahmood Qureshi. The formalities began with the Foreign Secretary planting a sapling, the gesture of a new beginning, you could say, in Pakistan's relationship with the UK. What did he have to say about this new beginning? A lot. At a bilateral press conference, Dominic Raab started by addressing the issue of British nationals stranded in Afghanistan and the Afghans who work for the UK government. Listen to this.
The reason being is clearly there are a whole range of issues that need to be discussed, including first and foremost at the moment the question of safe passage of British nationals and our so-called Arab workers, the Afghans who work for the UK government. We need to be able to convey direct messages on these things. There are particular cases outstanding which I won't go into because of the sensitivity, but we need to be able to have that dialogue.
The Foreign Secretary is facing severe criticism at home for holidaying in Greece as Kabul fell and his countrymen were stranded. He is now in Pakistan to seek help for the evacuation of the remaining British nationals. What about Afghans? Those who were promised democracy and progress by Western powers and now want to leave their country for a better life. Will Britain take them too? On this, Dominic Raab said that he's pleased to announce what he called £30 million of life-saving support that will help Afghanistan's neighbours provide shelter for those who come across the border.
I'm also pleased to announce that today we're releasing the first tranche of that extra aid money that I mentioned. We are sending up to £30 million of life-saving support to Afghanistan's neighbours, and that will include Pakistan, so that there is the money to provide the basics, the shelter, the household necessities, the sanitation for those who come across the border.
Let me put this bluntly. The aim of Dominic Raab's visit to Pakistan is to ensure that Afghan refugees don't land up in European countries.
After the Kabul airlift, we evacuated over 15,000 people to the UK, which was unprecedented for modern times, certainly for the UK. And we're working together to continue the secure, safe passage for those who haven't yet made it out of Afghanistan, whether they're British nationals or indeed those who have worked for us.
Focus on the words used. Whether those are British nationals or those who worked for us. Well, what about those who let Western powers ravage their lands in the name of progress? What about those who adopted Western models imposed on them by the US and its allies, including Britain, and now don't want to live under the Sharia law? Where will they go? They will be dumped in Afghanistan's neighborhood in countries like Pakistan and Central Asia. Pakistan, which has taken 1.4 million Afghan refugees since the beginning of America's forever wars, clearly does not mind taking any more, though they say they don't want any more. Pakistan might take them in, send them to Islamic seminaries, brainwash them with teachings of jihad, and push them back into Afghanistan as terrorists. This has happened. It happened the last time the West abandoned Afghanistan in the 90s. And there's no stopping Pakistan from doing it again. Do you know where Pakistan keeps most of the refugees from Afghanistan? In the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. According to former Afghan government's own estimates, 75% of the registered refugees and 96% of unregistered refugees live in this province of Pakistan, a province that is a hub of all kinds of terrorist activities in the country. The Jaish-e-Mohammed, the Tehreek-e-Taliban, the Lashkar-e-Toiba, all of them operate from terror camps in this province. And I'm not saying that these refugees, all of them get radicalized. They're looking for a better life, really. But time and again, reports by the West's own humanitarian watchdogs have revealed how young Afghan refugees in Pakistan are brainwashed at madrasas in Peshawar and then exploited by terror groups who hire them as recruits. If you needed any proof, any more proof of this, Pakistan's interior minister has settled them. He recently said that most of the Taliban's top leadership has been brought up by Pakistan, quote unquote. Listen to him.
और ये जितने नौजवान यहाँ मुहाजिरों में पढ़ते रहे, कई बड़ी माजरत के साथ मैं अब वजीर दाखिला हूँ, रेलवे में होता तो शायद और ज्यादा बातें कर सकता था। मेरी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी है। कई ये तालिबान लीडर जो टॉप हैं वो पैदा पाकिस्तान में हुए, पढ़े पाकिस्तान में। इसमें तो पाकिस्तान की खिदमत हैं कि इनको हमने तालीम दी और अब भी कई पढ़ रहे होंगे।
So let me say this. The abandonment of Afghan refugees by the West is criminal. They stayed in Afghanistan for 20 years. They exploited the country, made money for their defense companies, failed to live up to their promise of liberating Afghans from Taliban and terror, and now they're leaving them vulnerable to exploitation by Pakistan's deep state. Invading Afghanistan is a death wish. I think we can all agree on that. It's a sobering experience for superpowers. Some retreat in shame, others make peace with their old rivals. They begin a new chapter of cooperation. Russia is trying to do that with some good old diplomatic Russian roulette. They were not betting on the Taliban to win, you see. They were betting on America to lose. Russia was never happy with American presence in Afghanistan. It was too close to Central Asia. And Central Asia is Russia's backyard. This led to a tacit relationship between them and the Taliban. Nothing ideological about it, a purely transactional relationship. Think back to the mid-2020. Do you remember reports of the Russian bounty program? These came out last year. It said that Russia was paying the Taliban to kill American soldiers. The reports were never proven, but in hindsight, they all make sense. In July this year, a Taliban delegation visited Russia. They held a press conference from Moscow. What did they say? Exactly what Russia wanted to hear. The Taliban would not let violence spill over into Central Asia. So Moscow seemed convinced. When Kabul fell, they did not evacuate their citizens. They kept their embassy open. Russian diplomats said years of bloodshed was ending. Clearly, Moscow was expecting this. What they did not expect was the chaos that followed. On the 25th of August, Russia began evacuating its people from Kabul. The order came directly from Vladimir Putin. So what changed? The Taliban failed on its promise of law and order. Hundreds of refugees were crossing into Central Asia, something that President Putin had specifically warned against.
Our Western partners are insisting on an option to allocate Afghan refugees in Central Asian countries until they get visas for US and other countries. Does that mean they say it is possible to send them to these countries, to our neighbors without visas, but they don't want to accept them without visas themselves?
К нашим соседям, а к себе брать это без виз не хотят?
This is Russia's biggest concern, instability in Central Asia. We're talking about countries ruled by long-time strongmen. They do not care who rules Afghanistan as long as the war does not spill over. That was the case in the 1990s. The Taliban's rise triggered cross-border jihad. Criminal syndicates got a free run. If the new regime can prevent a repeat, Central Asia will be happy. But things don't look good. Jihadist groups are already rebuilding. The Kabul airport blast was a signal of their intentions. So what does Russia do? Protect the Central Asian border. You see, Russia and Central Asia have a military alliance. It's called the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization. In August, Russia, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan began a month-long military exercise. Nearly 1,800 Russian troops were deployed to the Afghan border. Another exercise is being planned this month, from September 7th to 9th. They will be held near the Tajik-Afghan border. The fact is that Russia is more measured than China. They're not rushing to recognize the Taliban or jumping in with investments. And it's clear why. Once bitten, twice shy. Russia tried to interfere in Afghanistan once. We all know how that ended. So this time, Moscow's engagements are more limited. President Putin is open to talks with the Taliban, but for a specific reason. He believes it is the best way to contain Afghanistan's terror threat.
There are many representatives of other organizations on the territory of Afghanistan today, including radical ISIS and so on. Many people have been freed from prisons, as you have said, radical elements. Regarding this, here's what I thought. Russia is not interested in the disintegration of Afghanistan. If it happens, there will be nobody to negotiate with.
President Putin was speaking at the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok. Also in attendance was India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He addressed the gathering virtually. The Prime Minister said the India-Russia relationship had stood the test of time. Yes, it has. Well, Afghanistan will test them again. Can India and Russia turn this challenge into an opportunity? Prime Minister Modi promised India's help in opening the Northern Sea route. It's one of President Putin's pet programs. What can India ask for in return? Possibly indirect leverage over the Taliban. It seems like New Delhi's best bet at the moment, because look at who else is left, Pakistan and China. Unlike them, Russia does not plan to forge an iron bond with the Taliban. It's more of political convenience. And there is precedent for this cooperation. In the 1990s, India and Russia backed the Northern Alliance. Plus, both sides had the same goal: peace and security in Asia. Meanwhile, terror has struck New Zealand once again. On Friday afternoon, 6 people were stabbed at a supermarket in Auckland. 3 of them are in critical condition. The attacker was shot dead within 60 seconds of his stabbing spree. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has called it a lone wolf terror attack, which she says was inspired by the Islamic State's ideology. Is this a signal of the emergence of Jihad 2.0 in the wake of the Taliban's rise? Our next report explores.
A violent extremist undertook a terrorist attack on innocent New Zealanders in the Newland countdown in Auckland.
It was just chaos. People that just started screaming. And I think it took a while when they just realized, oh my God, there is an attack here.
He's got a knife.
Friday afternoon, Auckland, New Zealand. A knife-wielding man went on a stabbing spree at a local supermarket. A total of 6 people were stabbed. 3 of them are in critical condition. New Zealand has labeled it a terrorist attack and is calling the attacker a violent extremist who was inspired by the ideology of the Islamic State. How did the attack unfold? Eyewitnesses filmed the chaos and panic inside the supermarket. The attacker appears to be running with a knife in his hand, frantically stabbing people on his way.
Oh my God.
Onlookers can be seen standing in disbelief as the violence takes place. It took about 60 seconds for the officials to put an end to this attack. He was shot and killed by the New Zealand police inside the mall. Now, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the suspect has been under police surveillance since 2016.
The attack began at 2:40 p.m. and was undertaken by an individual who was a known threat to New Zealand. The individual was under constant monitoring, and it was the police surveillance team and special tactics group who were part of that monitoring and surveillance that shot and killed him within, I'm told, the space of roughly 60 seconds of the attack starting.
Who exactly was he? His name and identity is unknown. Reports say the attacker was a Sri Lankan national who arrived in New Zealand in 2011. He became a person of national security interest from 2016. Why? This Jacinda Ardern won't reveal.
The detailed reasons he is known to the agencies is the subject of suppression orders made by the court. In my view, it is in the public interest to share as much as we can in this case.
He's got a knife.
It has been described as an Islamic State-inspired lone wolf attack. Lone wolves are individuals embracing the Islamic State's call for violence. They largely act alone. In the last decade, they have emerged as the new face of terrorism, the world over. Now, there are fears that such attacks may rise once again, because the timing of this one is quite significant. It coincides with the success of jihad in Afghanistan and a new era of Islamic rule. The Taliban's sympathizers the world over are gloating at the defeat of America. The Taliban are calling for jihadist forces to fight oppressors. Experts fear the attack in New Zealand may just be the beginning. The Afghanistan story will have repercussions across the world, especially for the United States.
I'd like to say this in closing. We don't need 4 planes flying into skyscrapers to create the threat of another 9/11. There's a possibility for people that don't like this country to create the same amount of fear, the same amount of economic damage to this country by doing other things. And if we don't stay on top of it, that can happen. And, I'm just hoping that the intelligence community, our military, our law enforcement is up to the task.
Got a knife.
Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Oh my God, everyone just ran out.
Terror attacks, a refugee crisis and a pandemic that keeps coming back. These are busy days for world leaders, and some of them are calling it quits. Well, here's the first big casualty. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga. He's stepping down after just 1 year in office. Japan's ruling party will hold a leadership race on the 29th of this month, 29 September, and Suga will not be part of it. He says he would much rather focus on beating the pandemic.
While thinking about running and thinking about COVID-19 measures and the election campaign, doing both takes enormous energy. I've decided that I should just choose one or the other. I've made many promises to the people. I want to dedicate myself to prevent the spread of this infection. This is what I have decided.
Frankly, he is not beating the pandemic. The pandemic just beat him. Suga's vaccine rollout was too slow. While other G7 nations raced ahead, Japan was way behind. That was strike one. Strike two was the Olympics. Suga was adamant on staging the games. He knew the Wuhan virus cases were rising in his country. He knew the hospitals were filled to the brink. But he went ahead anyway. It was a deeply unpopular decision. And as it turned out, a fateful one. Suga's approval ratings had been sliding for months. The pandemic accelerated his exit. Next question, who will replace him? Most pundits are betting on this man, Fumio Kishida. He's a former foreign minister of Japan. Last year, he was touted as a possible successor to Shinzo Abe, but he came in second to Suga. 2021 could be his year. There are also murmurs of a high-profile comeback. I'm talking about Shinzo Abe himself. Apparently, he has regained his health. He's more active on Twitter, at least, and he's making more public appearances. September 29th may be too early for him, but Abe and comebacks are a popular Japanese love story. To be fair to Suga, he inherited a tough political situation. He had to follow Japan's longest-serving prime minister and throw himself into pandemic work from day one. Plus, he was more of a concession candidate. Nobody else stepped up, so Suga did. He got the job. But here's a bigger question, and frankly a more interesting one. Why do Japanese prime ministers keep resigning? It's like a game of musical chairs. Since the year 2000, Japan has had 10 different prime ministers. That's 21 years and 10 prime ministers. And don't forget, Shinzo Abe was PM for 9 of those. What explains this string of resignations? Some say it's part of Japanese culture. Embattled leaders quit as soon as they can to save face and protect their honor. Others say it's because the Japanese political system demands accountability. If opinion polls reject a leader, they do not wait around for elections, they just walk away. And that's exactly what Suga is doing. His premiership does not make a mark on the world stage, but his resignation could. Suga is the first major world leader to resign during the pandemic. Others have mostly fired their health ministers. In 2021, 8 countries sacked their health ministers. Ecuador, Austria, Iraq, Argentina, Jordan, Peru, Slovakia and Mongolia. Brazil has had 4 health ministers since the pandemic began. But let's be honest, we all know who the problem is. Their president, Jair Bolsonaro, but he has no plans to resign. In Europe, only one world leader has resigned over the pandemic. The Prime Minister of Slovakia. He tried to sign a secret deal with Russia for Sputnik vaccines. Controversy followed and he had to step down. Talk about an irony. The only European leader who resigned was actually trying to acquire more vaccines. Speaking of vaccines, we know that the jabs can prevent severe COVID. But can they protect us from long-term effects of the Wuhan virus? We often ask each other, how do you think this pandemic will affect us in the long run? Well, none of us has the answers to these questions. At least not yet. Some experts believe that long COVID can increase a person's likelihood of developing dementia. It may also cause dementia symptoms to show up earlier. We are talking about a condition that causes loss of memory, that impairs a person's ability to perform day-to-day activities. Is the world prepared for this? Take a look at this report.
We have only begun understanding long COVID. We are just about coming to terms with the symptoms of long COVID. We now know that the Wuhan virus may leave us with temporary brain fog, loss of mental clarity, difficulty in concentration, difficulty recalling and thinking. But can all of this result in dementia? Some experts think it possibly can. The Alzheimer's Disease International is working to study the link between long COVID and dementia. In layman's terms, dementia is memory loss. But the more you read up about it, the scarier dementia gets. $1.3 trillion That's how much our world loses to dementia every year. At least 55 million people are living with dementia. Around 10 million new cases are being reported each year. The World Health Organization says that the number of people living with dementia could jump to 139 million by the year 2050. So what causes dementia? Deterioration in the brain. It is not a disease but a mental condition. What are the symptoms of dementia? A person with dementia has difficulty learning, making a judgment call, speaking a language, remembering names, numbers, appointments, roads. He or she also faces difficulty performing everyday tasks. Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia. The Wuhan virus may be the latest. According to one research, the Wuhan virus can increase a person's likelihood of developing dementia and also cause dementia-like symptoms to show up earlier. Is dementia an old man's problem? Contrary to popular belief, it's not. Nearly 10% of all cases are reported in those below 65 years. Can it be cured? Listen to the expert.
While dementia, we don't have a cure yet. It can be prevented.
So how do we prevent dementia? By controlling hypertension, diabetes, diet, depression, the use of alcohol and tobacco. As we head into another weekend, let's not forget to pay attention to our brain health. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching. Have a good weekend.